My honor and pleasure to be here with Professor Zvi Zohar, who is a renowned professor at Bar-Ilan of Jewish law and ethics. So thank you for taking time to talk.
Okay, my pleasure.
You wrote a very significant article in 2006 and more since then around this issue of sexual intimacy outside of marriage.
Right.
And I wonder, I guess before we get into the Halacha and the sources, if you can show, what are you responding to? What's happening in the Jewish world, in the world at large, that you're addressing, and who are the populations you're really addressing today?
Okay, so first of all, just
Yes.
to clarify, I'm not talking outside of marriage for somebody who is married.
Yes, of
Right?
course.
We're
Yes,
talking
of
about
course.
somebody who is not married.
That's right.
And, okay, and we're talking about two populations, which one probably didn't exist so much in ancient times, which is a young person who has reached sexual maturity and is a mature human being and is interested in having a monogamous relationship with a partner. And according to conventional halacha as it now stands, the only option that is presented as available to them is the option of marriage, chuppah, and kiddushin, and then you could have such a relationship. But perhaps people in the past, they used to get married when they were 14, 16, 17. So the period of time between sexual maturity and actually being able to live a sexual relationship was quite short. Today, for a variety of reasons, people are not getting married at when they're high school students, hopefully, and not only that, but really for a variety of reasons, we think, they think, everybody living in our society thinks that that's not the best age to get married, and people are studying in university, they're maybe going on to graduate school, they're not established financially, they're not, so they have a variety of reasons not to now get married, but they are interested, and it's a normal and healthy thing for human beings to want to be in monogamous relationships and to express this also physically.
Right.
And then we, in the Jewish tradition, think that's good.
Right.
We wouldn't want to have people living as brothers and sisters as the ancient.
Great. So there's three categories we're not talking about, and I think two that we are. Three we're not talking about is young children, children at all. We're not talking about those who are in a marriage, of course, and we're not talking about polygamous relationships, those who are sleeping around.
That's right.
So we're dealing with either those who have reached sexual maturity, who are responsibly in a monogamous relationship, and we're talking about those perhaps who have been divorced, who
widowed.
Many people have had trauma in a past marriage, and they don't want to remarry, but they do want to be in a relationship. Are those the two categories we're talking about?
Right, or they don't want to remarry now.
Now, right.
Or they were widowed, and let's say even so they want to be in a relationship, but the whole notion of again entering into a marriage situation, at this time they're not ready for that.
And so you suggest that there is a Halakhic framework. There's a framework within Jewish law for these types of individuals to responsibly and halakhically engage in sexual intimacy. So can you tell us a little bit about that framework?
Okay, that framework is called in Hebrew Pilegesh, and this framework has an unfortunate history because in modern times, when the Hebrew language was being renewed and translators were looking for a word that was with the same content as mistress, which is a person who is in addition to the married relationship, they used the term Pilegesh. And this became confused in people's minds as something that is a sign of actually sexual profligacy and not committed a relationship. But originally, in biblical terms and in rabbinic terms, Pilegesh is not derogatory, and there's a famous story in the Bible, in the book of Judges, called Pilegesh Bagiv'ah, which tells the story of a couple who were in the framework of such a relationship, and then they had a fight, and the woman went back to her father's home, and the man went to pacify her, and he says, the father her father is described there as his in-law, and they had, and then on the way back, she was raped by the man of Givat Binyamin, and this was considered such an outrage because she was in a perfectly legitimate relationship with this other fella, and they raped her. This caused a terrible civil war in which the tribe of Benjamin was almost decimated. So this was considered a respectful relationship in biblical times, and it also exists in Halakhic literature in medieval and modern times.
Yeah. So can you give some examples of how rabbis have employed this concept over, I guess, this last 1,000 years, really, in ways that might be meaningful to those in the 21st century? Yeah.
Okay, so rabbis typically employed this mostly in order to deal with specific solutions which they felt was not appropriate to apply standard marriage. For instance, Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman is talking about a Kohen who wants to marry a woman he's not supposed to marry, and in this case a Geurit, and or a woman that her husband passed away, she wants to get married very quickly with another man, and there's a certain waiting period. And anyway, so what David Zvi Hoffman says, under these circumstances, Kiddushin would not be appropriate, but that same couple could live together under the framework of Pilegesh, and it's mutar, and they're, even if, by the way, they would have children born to them, the children are perfectly legitimate, and there's no problem with that. A different famous rabbi from Egypt, Rabbi Eliyahu Hazan, writes about a situation in which men came, they were living in Egypt, but they were citizens of European states in which at that time there was no divorce, Catholic states like France, Italy, there was no divorce. So now here they were in Egypt, and they had a fight with their wife, and they really wanted to get divorced, but they couldn't get divorced according, so what could they do? Okay, and he said, under the circumstances, the best thing that they could do, even without getting divorced from the first wife, who has now left them and is not there anymore, and there's no way of getting technically divorced, but they, so that monogamous relationship is dead, and they're not together, so they could have a get, but they couldn't remarry according to civil law. So now they could have this framework to live together. And there's other...
Now, is this considered znus? Is this considered, how do you translate znus?
Promiscuous relationship.
How would this be categorized?
No, this is... Okay, so that's a good question. No, it's not considered zinut. Zinut means that people are basically what we would call sleeping around. And not in a committed relationship. And... or not in a committed monogamous relationship, and such a person is considered involved in zinut, which the tradition frowns on.
Now, there's those emerging today who feel uncomfortable with kiddushin for various reasons, maybe because of the patriarchal dimensions, maybe because of the problem of agunot, those who are trapped in marriages without being able to receive a get. Would you say to that population that the Pilegesh route could be a route for them to have an honorable Jewish relationship and avoid those issues that are philosophically uncomfortable for them?
I have thought about that, and there are people that are actually doing that. And under such a situation, we're talking about people who are basically looking for something which, in their mind and the public's mind, is essentially a marriage relationship, but without the element of kiddushin, which is the patriarchal kinyan, as it is the acquisition of the woman by the man, and which subsequently, if something would go wrong in the relationship, would require a halakhic divorce procedure, which is contingent upon the man's agreement, and if he's doesn't want, then we could get into a problem which is called aguna. And there are situations, and I have seen such marriages in Israel, in which you are there, and if you don't know, they have a chuppah, and they say Sheva Barachot, and it looks like a traditional marriage and everybody correctly feels good about this.
Right.
The Sheva Brachot talk about the beauty of the relationship between man and woman and creation and redemption and all of that. But the element of kinyan, instead of saying hareat mikudeshet li, they use a different language which doesn't create kiddushin, and effectively what they're now entering halachically is this kind of status.
Can you reflect briefly on 20th century American halakha, where rabbis committed to the halakhic system are trying to engage with all of the marriages that are being performed outside of the halakhic system, and how they understand that, and if and where that intersects with this notion of Pilegesh also?
As you know, Orthodox rabbis were and are concerned about the situation that non-Orthodox denominations do have marriage ceremonies which go by the book and are essentially very similar in most cases, certainly conservative, in many reform, and they do use the language of kiddushin, and they have witnesses and everything like that. And then, however, for a variety of reasons, they feel that a Jewish marriage can end without a halachic bill of divorce. And were these marriages, which look perfectly according to the book, as it were, to be considered officially marriages that create kinyan, and therefore they need to have divorce, then many people in the American Jewish scene would be considered still married to their original partners, whom they divorced, since they're not Orthodox, by other ways. And now their second marriage would be an illegitimate marriage, and children born to them under such marriages would be in big trouble according to classic halacha. They would be mamzerim. So what most Orthodox poskim have typically done is to say, okay, this looks like a halachic marriage, but in the bottom line, it's not valid, and therefore these people never entered into a valid halachic marriage, although the ceremony looks similar, and therefore at the tail end, should that occur, chas v'chalila, that they would decide to get divorced, they would not require a halachic divorce, and a subsequent remarriage would not entail a problem, and the woman wouldn't be issued.
So they're not considering those relationships znut, so would they basically say that was a Pilegesh type relationship ultimately?
Well, I don't think that anybody has pressed them to the wall about that specific definition, but typically, to give an analogy, let's say people did marry in an Orthodox marriage, and after some time, for a variety of causes, the husband now disappeared. We don't know where he is, and so on. And rabbis would want to now say why the original kiddushin, there was some flaw there, and it really the witnesses weren't really kosher witnesses. The ring wasn't really the belonging to the... Anyway, they would find some way to now say that the original ceremony, upon inspection, we now see is not valid. So, obviously, they wouldn't say that this couple until now, because of this, was living promiscuously. So what were they doing? It would probably turn out to be diavad that they were living in the framework of Pilegesh, although to say that name is something that's difficult.
Great. So I think my last question then is to what extent you might advise, meaning are there any concerns or cautions you would give, or do you think this is something that should be embraced, and if so, how, for communal leaders and for those who are struggling in these type of situations?
Well, first of all, I think that by pointing out this option, we are making clear where the ethical and religious moral divide really exists, which is not between kiddushin on the one side and all other types of sexual activity on the other side, but we're showing that the boundary is between committed monogamous relationships on the one side and promiscuous, non-committed relationships on the other side. And that's where the moral and religious boundary should be put. Okay? And by doing this, we're also, I think, we would enable young people and also older people to situate themselves much better in relation to the classic Jewish Halakhic Torah values, which is monogamous committed relationship, rather than with it's like a black and white situation, and if you're not completely fully married, then something's wrong with you. You're doing something bad.
And many run away from the halachic system because they see it doesn't meet their needs, and they feel outside, and they can't embrace and be honest about their integrity of what they're pursuing.
And it would also, I think, link more strongly the notion that our view, or not, the Torah's view, the rabbinic view of a relationship is sex should be connected to commitment. And love, involvement, and respect, and not just separated from that into like a pure pleasure machine.
Now, I've heard some suggest that this might actually be less fair to women because it will delay marriage in some ways. Because of the comforts of that relationship as it is, and I'm curious of your response to that. And delay fertility, the potentials of actualizing fertility. Yeah.
Okay, so my response to that would be two. First of all, in real life, what's really happening? Okay, young people are living together, and it's not that by saying that that's us or that's not permitted, that is really having any effect upon 95% of the Jewish population, even within modern Orthodoxy. Okay, so that's response number one. Response number two is that people wrote a critique of my article. So response number two is that behind this critique lies a type of assumption that marriage is really a type of exchange, because the man is interested in sex, the woman is interested in stability, and she doesn't give the sex without him giving the stability. But I'm not sure that that's a full picture of women who are interested in love, relationship, and so on. And physical affection is a human characteristic that we shouldn't say, well, no, you have to live as a nun unless there's 100% commitment. And it's a choice. Now, I'm not saying that a woman should make that choice or shouldn't make that choice, or that a man should make it, but knowing that that option exists and how it's different from a promiscuous sleeping around is, I think, religiously important.
And lastly, as I'm curious if you might agree as well, that I think that we should be honest about Torah and honest about the boundaries of Halacha, and empower people to make choices as opposed to trying to hide sources and try to control choices people make, but rather put the sources out and let people make those decisions themselves. That's part of what it means to be a religious person.
I personally fully agree with that, and I wrote about this in the article. And as a point of matter, it's now very accepted in Orthodox rabbinic circles to say that at some time in the past was made a rabbinic decision that a single woman is not allowed to immerse in a mikveh. There never was such a decision that was ever made, and it doesn't appear in the books until very, very recently that some rabbis claimed this existed, but nobody is able to really point to a real
Right.
source for that.
Yeah.
And here they're trying to conceal that option
That's right.
exists.
That's right.
And,
And all that creates is distrust and alienation. And it goes without saying we should make the mikvah open to those who choose to use a mikvah. Okay, Yashikar, keep
Okay,
up your wonderful
very
work.
good.